So I've already reviewed the original Boris Karloff mummy, but we don't have that much time in between the new one and now, which the new one comes out next weekend. So we're just going to jump ahead into the Brendan Fraser series, and we're starting off with 1999's remake of The Mummy. The Mummy from 1999 stars Brendan Fraser, Rachel Weisz, John Hannah, Arnold Vosloo, and is written and directed by Stephen Sommers. The story is a slight modification of the original. It focuses on the high priest Imhotep, who served one of the great pharaohs of Egypt and had a love affair with the pharaoh's mistress, Anaxudamun. So they're discovered, both of them kill the pharaoh, and Anaxudamun kills herself, knowing that Imhotep, who's the keeper of the dead, can resurrect her and they can live happily ever after. But the pharaoh's bodyguards find him, kill his priests, and mummify Imhotep to be buried forever. So cut to the 1920s when a group of people travel to the city of the dead where Imhotep was laid to rest, only to discover the Book of the Dead and his corpse, and through some more foolishness, the mummy is resurrected, and it's everyone's job to try kill him. Mostly this adventurer named Rick O'Connell, played by Brendan Fraser. So this mummy series is the mummy of my generation. And when I say that, I mean it came out when I was growing up, because I actually didn't watch this movie until the Revenge of the Mummy ride opened at Universal Studios Hollywood and Universal Studios Florida. Back then, I wasn't too big on horror movies and didn't really get into them until my teenage years. In fact, the same year the Revenge of the Mummy rides opened. The first true horror movie that I ever saw was Jaws, and that was when I was 8 years old. And I just thought to myself, well, I'm not watching horror movies for a while, but I was a big fan of the Godzilla series at the time. I don't know. So with the Mummy movies, I never actually watched them, but I've seen bits of the first one, and what I saw was kind of horrifying. There were a lot of things in it that creeped me out, and I was just like, I don't want to see this. So cut to 2004, when I finally saw this first movie, I thought to myself, this isn't a horror movie at all. This is like some sort of low-rate, B-grade Indiana Jones type movie. Nothing too horrific about it. Let me first say this. Calling it a B-grade Indiana Jones type movie doesn't mean that it's bad at all. In fact, this movie's actually really enjoyable if you take it as one of those old adventure serials that the Indiana Jones films were paying tribute to. This very much feels like one of those movies that was made back in the day. However, if you want to stay in the realm of Universal and their Mummy movies, this is pretty much if you took the plot of the original Boris Karloff Mummy and added in the adventure element that was in The Mummy's Hand, which was the first Mummy movie to come out after the 1932 original. So it's not uncommon that this particular series of Mummy movies would go in that action-adventure route, because this movie does actually have some horror elements to it. The adventure element is done really well. You truly get a sense of adventure when you watch this movie, but there are a lot of really good horror elements in here as well. Most of the movie's cheesy, but when it has these horror elements, it can be effective. The scarab beetles are some of the creepier parts of the movie. Just knowing that these flesh-eating beetles can swarm all over you, eat your flesh, and even crawl under your skin and eat you from inside. That's just kind of creepy. There are also some horrific images, like when Imhotep basically has to regenerate to become more human or appear more human. He sucks the soul of those who opened up his tomb, and they pretty much become dried up. It looks cheesy, but there are points where it can be really horrific. The one horror element that really did it for me, though, is concerning the mummy's first victim, who I swear to God is Cyril Figgis from Archer. But anyway, the mummy's first victim basically has his eyes stolen and his tongue cut out, just so the mummy can see and speak. And when you see this guy after the eyes and tongue are taken out, you might think that they're just going to show him briefly without any eyes, or just give you the impression that he's missing his eyes and tongue. But no, there's a good about 5 seconds of the movie where they stay on him, showing these two gaping holes where his eyes are, and you're just like, oh my God. It's just like in Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, when Hitchcock could easily give you the impression that these victims had had their eyes poked out by the birds, but then you look at them and go, nope, those are big gaping sockets where their eyes are. I'm done. I'm done here. So those horror elements are effective, and some of them can be really cheesy, which does kind of play into the cheesy nature of this movie. Because this is not a movie that I don't think should be taken that seriously at all. It has a very cheesy yet charming feel to it, and a lot of that does have to do with your main guy, Brendan Fraser. Brendan Fraser is an actor who I think is really underrated, at least back in the day. Nowadays, you don't really see him, but he has done some really good things, or at least fun things, like Gods and Monsters, George of the Jungle, and Still Breathing. And he does have good charisma. Looking at him, you wouldn't really expect him to be this heroic and charismatic action hero, but in The Mummy, he actually works. Not to the level of Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones, but enough to where you really like this guy. There are a lot of cheesy elements with him as well. For example, he always has these 2 pistols with him that never seem to run out of ammo. He can throw chairs at people flawlessly, like on a Corey Coleman style of throwing chairs. And he just gives out a bunch of cheesy one-liners as well, but he works. You believe him as an action star, and he has great charisma. Another person who's really good in this movie is Rachel Weisz, who plays Evelyn. She is the total opposite of Brendan Fraser. She's more proper, she's British, she has more of an interest and knowledge of Egyptian history, as opposed to Brendan Fraser's character, but she's very charming and likable as well, in a different way than Brendan Fraser's charming and charismatic, but the two of them really do play well together, and their chemistry works great. You have a couple of other side characters. The Mummy himself is actually not too memorable once he actually becomes Arnold Vosloo. You have this warrior, or Medjai as they're called, and then you have John Hannah, who plays Evelyn's brother, John. That's pretty unoriginal, guys, but he's mainly there for the comic relief. There are points where he can get annoying, but they're very far and few in between in this movie particularly, because his comedic tone works well at points, and he's also effective. He's not just a throwaway character, and he actually provides help with the plot and to the other characters. And also, rewatching this movie, I actually had no idea that John Hannah was Scottish, and it's not until one of my best friends from work kept telling me over Facebook, "You had no idea that he's Scottish? Just watch the movie and look at how many times his Scottish accent breaks out." And watching it, I'm like, wow, there are actually points where his Scottish accent actually pops up. Particularly the scene when he, Rick, and Evelyn are trying to dig up for a treasure. So yeah, I never actually knew that in the long time that I've really enjoyed this movie. There are some things that don't work well with this movie, especially watching it now with an adult perspective, because the last time I saw this movie was before the third Mummy movie was coming out, which we'll get to soon. But this movie has a lot of things in it that don't hold up, or rewatching it you go, this movie's cheesy, but there are points that are just like downright stupid. At the time this movie came out, the CG worked well because it was one of the first times when CG was used to create a fully computer-generated character, like not a creature like in Jurassic Park, but a character like Jar Jar Binks in Phantom Menace. So I can't be too harsh on it because it is one of those elements where it looks bad now, but that's only because technology has advanced so far that it's not really fair to criticize it. For example, if you were to take the stop-motion animation from Mighty Joe Young and then compare it to that of 1925's The Lost World, yeah, of course The Lost World's going to look like crap by comparison because technology has advanced so far in between 1925 and 1949 when Mighty Joe Young came out. Same with this movie here. If you were to compare it to CGI effects today, of course it's going to look bad. So again, it's something you can't really blame the filmmakers for. One thing about this movie that I really am not a big fan of is the big end-of-the-world scenarios that happen now that the Mummy's been resurrected. And that's because the Mummy's motivation in this movie is identical to his motivation in the original Boris Karloff movie. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that because the Mummy wants to resurrect his mummy girlfriend, the world's suddenly coming to an end, rivers are running red with blood, the citizens are turning into zombified slaves for Imhotep. My favorite, and I mean this in a totally sarcastic way, is when the sky rains fireballs as if it's a scene straight out of Armageddon. And what I love about the scene is that you'd think fireballs raining from the sky would be the worst scenario. Like, that's the end-all be-all of global catastrophes. But this happens sometime after the Mummy's resurrected. None of our heroes get affected by it. You just see a CGI shot of the sky with fireballs falling from the sky, and then it's never addressed ever again. There's no talk about it. The city doesn't look like it's damaged in the slightest. So again, I wish they had just made this a more simple movie and not make it feel like the fate of the world is at stake. Lastly, and this is more like a nitpick, there are some really stupid moments in this movie involving Rick O'Connell. As much as I enjoyed Brendan Fraser in this movie, there are a few things in this movie that made me go, why did you do that? Or, what are you thinking? The first is when he shoots a shotgun at a whole swarm of scarab beetles, as if a shotgun blast is going to take care of a bunch of bugs. And two is when he and the other heroes are being chased on an airplane by this giant sand wall, with the mummy's face on it, which I'm still not sure how I feel about them bringing that back in this new Tom Cruise movie. But anyway, they're in a biplane, and this giant sand wall with Imhotep's face is chasing after them, and Rick O'Connell thinks it's a good idea to use the plane's gun and just shoot at this giant face made out of sand. And it's like, what are you doing? What the hell do you think a machine gun is going to do to a wall of sand? God knows how many birds you've shot down, assuming that they're birds in the desert, and assuming they didn't die in the sand wall. It's stupid. It's just really stupid. But despite my criticisms, and I think some of them are legit criticisms, I still enjoy this movie. Many years later, even with an adult perspective, it's still a lot of fun. Is it as good as Raiders of the Lost Ark or Curse of the Black Pearl in terms of adventure films? No, it doesn't even come close to it. It's more like one of those B movies that you see back in the 30s and 40s, and it does its job well. It's fun, it's action-packed, it's humorous, you do like these characters. It runs for a little too long, but you're having so much fun with it that after a while it just sort of flies by. So, I'd say this is definitely a good movie. It's not a great movie by any means necessary. It has problems, as I mentioned before, but as long as you're willing to have fun with it, it's good. It can be enjoyed. And that's my review for the 1999 remake of The Mummy. If you noticed a difference in terms of audio or the way I sound when talking, it's because my mic crashed during half of the recording. So I had to replace the mic. It took a couple days, and now I had to finish the review with a different mic. So that's why you hear a slight audio difference. But anyway, thank you for watching this review. The new Tom Cruise Mummy comes out next weekend, but I still have 2 more movies to talk about. Both of those reviews will be up next week, and next up we're going to be talking about The Mummy Returns. So until then, I hope you enjoyed this review of The Mummy. Leave a comment down below and tell me what your thoughts are on the movie, if and when you've seen it. And as always, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you, there's only one.